Bare necessities, simple bare necessities. I don't like people that understand why people like me to keep these intros in. You know, we're kind of like, no, don't get rid of the intros. Like, why? Doesn't make any sense. I'll edit that out. You won't see this. That was me talking to myself on that one. One of the questions that I've gotten a whole lot recently, and especially since the prior video of the demonstration over top of that large monster magnet, was the question from so many people, where does magnetism come from? Kind of a simple question. It's the innocent, simple questions that always confounds professors, for example. You see me, Mr. Professor? What's a field? Ask your local physics professor what the term energy refers to. See, excuse me, this is a good one too. It says, it is the movement of power or electricity from one place to the next, the flow of electrons. Yes, it is. Invariably so it is. Oh, how does wireless power induction work? In a vacuum? Well, it's lines of force. It's a good one. That's an obfuscation, by the way, because force of what, by what, and upon what. Force is not a thing in itself. Neither is a shadow. Shadow is another. There's a shadow. Shadow is, of course, an absence of light. Lines? Lines of what? No, lines. Lines are not things in nature. Sure, there's a line. It's here. Line of what? That's like saying wave. Wave of what? There's no such thing as waves. What are you talking about? I see waves in the ocean all the time. Waves of what? Water. Here we go. We're talking about water now, aren't we? Anyway, getting back to the point, where does magnetism come from? It is a really simple question, and yet it begs the question to be answered. And I basically have every book, including ancient books, on magnetism, and none of them answer the question. And we think human beings love to pigeonhole things. So we have ice, water, and steam. Ice is that hard stuff, and steam's that hot gaseous stuff. Well, aren't these just different temperature pressure modalities of water? And of course the answer is yes. So the answer to the question, which no book and no university and no high school will ever do, in explaining what is magnetism, let me first ask you the question, where did ice come from? Isn't ice a temperature modality of water? When we say ice is floating like the iceberg that sunk the Titanic, we got ice in the water. Well, more accurately, it would be correct to say that here's a different modality of water floating in itself as a different modality, because ice in the water is no different than saying water in the water. To be precise, without using dry scientific humor there, it has been said by James Clerk Maxwell that magnetism is a dielectric field. Fundamentally, that does answer the question, but what does that really mean? The dielectric field. The fundamental equation, which is my discovery, which is tattooed right here on the inside of my right wrist, like, well, why is there a release of energy at all? It's like asking the question, how can you have something without an attribute, like light and illumination? Nobody knows light without illumination, its extrinsic attribute. Nobody knows the dielectric, or energy, i.e. inertia, which is non-Cartesian, because the geometry of dielectric is, of course, the hyperboloid. We're talking about the field of counter space. Specifically, we're talking about the ether. And, of course, everything, including all fields, by definition, it's like, what is a field? A field is an ether perturbation modality, just like ice and steam are temperature pressure modalities of water. Fundamentally simple. As I've said humorously, Mother Nature's a hairy armpit chick with a hemp skirt and muddy feet. She doesn't use a calculator. Everything is simplex pressure mediation. So where does magnetism come from? We're approaching that question, but first we have to build up to it, obviously so. Like every atom, for example, which science has gotten correctly, and say, well, every atom, like if this were to be an atom, the nucleus inside would be infinitesimally small, and it'd just be, so, well, every atom is 99.99999% empty space. Well, it's not empty, it's just a magnetodielectric dynamo, even the most simple atom, i.e. hydrogen, and of course all atoms are nothing other than compounds of hydrogen, is a magnetodielectric dynamo. So that which gives volume and mass. People say, why are you so interested in understanding magnetism? So, well, the entire universe has mass and magnitude and resultantly space, and then also too resultantly time due to one thing and one thing only, magnetism. This being the case, fundamentally understanding magnetism would not only explain the cosmos nuitos, but the cosmos athitos, i.e. meaning the material universe, and the aesthetic or the transcendent universe, i.e. ontology. Yes, not about physics merely, but also too metaphysics, which these are, of course, the inverse sides of the same coinage. You know, there's not physics over here and metaphysics over there. It's the exact head and tail of the same silver of the coinage. So you have a three-dimensional force vector. Imagine taking a piece of wire, and I took my wire roll up to the cabin. I bend you some wire. Take a piece of wire, bend it like an S curve, just an S, right? Take each end and bend it inverse to one another. And if you look at it edge on, after you bent each end inverse to one another, you'll actually see this curly cube, the circuitous curvature of looking head on the piece of S wire that you've bent each end inverse to one another. And if you were to imagine it in 360 degrees, you'll see the extrapolation of a torus. Because, of course, the magnetic field is toroidal, which, of course, I've explained a million different times. And, of course, these so-called lines that you see underneath the ferrocell, or you see in the dual slit experiment, which, of course, starts out with false suppositions as to the nature of light, because light is not a particle, light is not a wave, it's not a wave-particle duality, nor are there any dualities in nature. Light is not an emission, light is not a photon. These are arbitrary misconceptions as to the nature of light. You can't do an experiment on anything that you don't understand the medium thereof. So what is magnetism? Getting to the simplex heart of it. Since magnetism by definition is the universe's most fundamental force, and is force by definition. Yes, the release of energy or inertia in counter space, and I say in counter space, still gives it a Cartesian value, and speaking of counter space, is that if it has an XYZ coordinate. The loss of that energy or inertia, necessitatively so, must manifest as what? What's the most fundamental, absolute fundamental, from one end of this universe to the next, release of energy? In terms of the release of energy, which of course is necessitated, and this is where the Greeks came up with the eiristostaias, or ananke, which you could loosely translate it as necessity, but it doesn't really mean necessity. It means it can't exist any other way. For a mushroom cloud, for example. Mushroom cloud from uranium or plutonium is not from a ball much bigger than this. You see this rising mushroom cloud. Well, if you take the top of that mushroom, it's just a super gigantic torus. The only reason why it has a stem on it, i.e. a mushroom effect, is of course those super hot gases. Of course all hot air rises. You have this rising toroid, but of course if hot air didn't rise, you just have this supermassive force torus. Yes? Well, imagine that softball-sized lump of plutonium or uranium infinitely smaller, to the point where it has no Cartesian value. You could actually say it's ether or counter space itself. The release of that energy, fundamentally in its most simplex form, is a three-dimensional S-curve. I say this over and over again, but I don't think people actually put it in their head what a three-dimensional S-curve is. Take a piece of wire, bend it into an S. Take each end and bend it inverse to the other end. Yeah? Now, the Tibetans, even though I have no love for Vajrayana, have this interesting hand mudra. Take each hand like this, like you're doing some sort of fighting tiger. I don't know what this particular pose is. Put them right next to each other, just like this, right? Your fingers to a point like this. Here's this mudra. If you don't know what a mudra is, you can look up mudra. They have this mudra, and they contemplate on it. You can see countless thousands of videos on this. And it is also, too, a hand gesture of the three-dimensional force vector of nature. Yes? And the mudra itself goes like this. Yes? And they reverse it. You can see this mudra from the Vajrayanas in retroductive analysis, going very deep. I don't care what word you want to ascribe to it. Samadhi, sati, jhana, which all, of course, comes from the word jayati, meaning to burn, burning away objectivity, to pure subjectivity, the fundamental force vector of nature, which these people for thousands of years throughout all of history have thought very deeply about. They've had a vision. And the vision manifested as this thought paradigm, and I don't mean literal thought, but a cogitation of the geometry of natura naturans, i.e. natural order, and it manifests as this interesting mudra, and it goes exactly like this. I'm doing it really slowly so you can look at it. Yes? This is the extrapolation of a three-dimensional force vector. Each one is inverse to the other, however, the same with respect to each, and this one's going clockwise and that one's going clockwise. Just like that. Then an extrapolation, of course, makes up a torus, the three-dimensional force vector of the release of energy or inertia from counter space manifesting as fundamental force in motion. The release of energy or inertia necessitatively, there's that word again, necessitatively manifesting as the three-dimensional force vector that is magnetism. Magnetism is not anything different than the dielectric, yet human beings who love to pigeonhole things, ice, water, and steam, human beings have done this through countless different observed phenomena in the universe. We give it different names. Well, that's this and that's this. Like electricity or light and matter. I spent years, and I'm ashamed of myself, reconciling light and matter, and yet they're, of course, already reconciled from the perspective of nature. Well, matter is just super high energy light. Everything is a compound of hydrogen. Everything is very, very simple. There's not electricity and gravity and dielectricity and magnetism. Gravity is just non-point source mutual mass acceleration. Electricity is a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism, or phi times psi equals Q and Planck of electrification. Magnetism is a toroidal force vector of fundamental force in motion, i.e. the release of energy or inertia of the dielectric. The negative geometry of the dielectric, which at the centermost point, which doesn't have a center because it has no Cartesian value, of the dielectric is that pinch point. You know what an hourglass shape is, right? Everybody's seen a glass hourglass. You turn it upside down and the sands pour through the hourglass. That little pinch point right there at the center, which has no Cartesian value whatsoever, of counter space. Well, the negative image of that hyperboloid, of that hourglass shape, of course, is the torus, the release of that energy. And if you actually imagine the hourglass, which of course doesn't work that way, a real hourglass full of sand, from the center point of which the sands would represent the lines of fundamental force vectors, pouring out from the dead center towards the top, and of course the tops would have to be open and the sand would all fall out. But imagine if the sand were fundamentally tied at that choke point at the center. In other words, that the sand grains were tethered in counter space, yet they are impelled by the loss of energy or inertia. How would they thence travel? They would travel geometrically in the form of a torus. In other words, each sand grain is tethered at the choke point center of that hourglass. You apply energy to them, which is their own energy and loss thereof. Necessitatively, they follow the extrapolation of the same thing as this ancient Tibetan, and it actually came from India. It's ascribed to the Tibetans now, but this mudra came from ancient India. Of course, India didn't exist back then either, but from that same region, India, northeast in Magadha Valley of ancient India, of the Sakya or the Scythian people, and migrated vis-a-vis Mahayanism into Tibet, where it since remained because it is a great paradigm to contemplate. You know, what does this mean, the fundamental force vector? Each one of those sand grains invisibly tethered at the choke point of that hyperboloid or hourglass shape, it will absolutely follow the curvilinear force vector of the torus. That is what magnetism is. Now, if the sand grains are not actual physical objects, we understand them as energy vectors from counter space. That three-dimensional force vector, the release of energy thereof, is the necessitative force vector of said release of energy. How would the release of energy in its most simplex variety manifest? And they manifest as a toroidal force vector of extrapolation that human beings call magnetism. Where does magnetism come from? Well, it comes from counter space. But from implies a place, a topos, which is a place in space and time with an XYZ coordinate or a GPS coordinate. But that's not the case. People say, how many dimensions are there? Everybody has been watching like Doctor Strange in the multiverse. Everybody thinks there's how many dimensions are there? How many universes? Well, there's only Mother Nature isn't that crazy. Not crazy at all, in fact. There's only two. There's space and counter space. What dimensions? Two. Like light and illumination. They're not two different things. They're the conjugate pair of the entire universe. Energy at rest. Victor Schauberger even said this. So did Walter Russell say this. People say, you know who Walter Russell is? I'm shocked when people say, I digitized Walter Russell's works. They're out there on the internet. Thanks to me. You're welcome. That and countless other incredibly important works, which I digitized and put out there for free for everybody, by the way. So, force is always expansive. Inertia dielectric is always contractive. That countless people use the phrase dielectric force, or dielectric lines of force, is completely ridiculous. Dielectricity is the opposite of force. Completely incorrect. This is an intellectual defect, of course. Magnetism and the dielectric field of the conductors are both included in the terms electric field, and these are the two components of the electric field. Electrical discharges, waves, and impulses. The genius, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, more intelligent and more patents than Nikola Tesla, by the way. Everybody loves to flap their lips about Tesla, which is fine, but Charles Proteus Steinmetz perfected Nikola Tesla's AC generator, which is not a generator actually at all, but a manifester. Specifically, it's an arch form for the manifestation of energy. No AC generator generates power. That's a distinction with a difference. It's a huge difference between generating something. I'm going to make something. You're generating something. You know, like I'm making this leather guitar strap. That's generating something. Yeah? Manifesting something is conjuring something. It's like, you know, Harry Potter here, or wave your magic wand. It's conjured. It's manifest. It's a huge difference between manifesting and generating. That's something for people to think about. A lot of people have actually thought about, oh, I never thought about that before. I thought about it when you mentioned it in a video, and it's like, wow, it blew my mind. I actually get it now. No AC generator generates power at all. They manifest power. So, where does magnetism come from? The term magnetism is the word human beings have given to the dielectric field expressing itself resultant to losing some energy. And why would it lose energy? Then, of course, begs another question. In necessitatively, there's that word again, necessitative, as the ancient Greek Pythagoreans, incommensurability, tolma, anake, necessitated. It doesn't really translate correctly as necessitated. It means can't be any other way, like light and illumination. I ask anybody to think of light without illumination, right? Just, I dare you. I beg you. It's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. Doesn't make any sense. It's not a koan. Yeah, it's not a Zen koan. Just think about it a second. Can you imagine light without illumination? Its extrinsic attribute, an inseparable unity, just like the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence, the agathon and the euristos dias, i.e., one and one. They're not two different things. Neither is light and illumination two different things. Like, why thence does it release energy? By the way, 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3, which is a discovery that I made in Plato's Republic, 509d to 511, which didn't belong to Plato. It wasn't a discovery of Plato. He got that from the Pythagoreans, and who knows before Pythagoras of Samos. The Egyptians, who knows? Speculative, we don't know. But where does magnetism come from? We could say crudely that it comes from counter space, but that really wouldn't be accurate, but it would be totally accurate. Counter space is rather a silly word. We could say zero-point energy, the ether, non-Cartesian ultimate reality. All mass, matter, and magnitude is holographic anyway. Everything follows the Poincare disk model of projective geometry. Space is the resultant after effect of a divergent magnetic. Think of a large torus or a donut. Basically, this apple is shaped like a torus. Yeah, instead of the meat of the apple, in the case of the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, which of course makes this toroidal shape, the resultant after effect is a wake. And that wake, or the meat of the apple, is what human beings call space. Space has no properties. Quote, unquote, Nikola Tesla. The only time Nikola Tesla foams at the mouth, I might remind you, is that the notion forwarded by relativity vis-a-vis the cult of bumping particles and Albert Einstein, that space has properties and it acts upon things. We've been watching that garbage in science fiction movies, Star Trek, blah, 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 for decades. Well, it's all a lie, of course. Nikola Tesla told you it was a lie. Space has no properties. But it is a resultant wake of a divergent magnetic force vector. Ultimate extrapolation thereof, of course, the resultant being the meat of the apple, or what human beings would call space. Space is no different than a shadow. A shadow is not a thing at all. Well, we think shadows do things. It's like, I was in a shadow, I couldn't see it, I crashed my car. We all think a shadow is something. Oh, look at my shadow, it's so cool. It's a noun in the dictionary, but a shadow is not a thing. It's an absence of something. You know what space is? An absence thereof? The loss of energy or inertia manifesting as that toroidal field. Yes. Of magnetism, which is the dielectric field in extrapolation, the loss of energy or inertia, the hollow of that energy or inertia as so released, a void of energy. It's the negative image of true energy or infinity, or you could say the negative image of God. Once you have space, you have mass and magnitude. When you have mass and magnitude, you have time. Time is not a thing either. Time is no different than a shadow, no different than space. Time is only a measure. You have mass and magnitude. When this is present, the ancient Pali phrase over and over again repeated, when this is present, that is present. When this is not present, then that is not present. When you have the loss of energy or inertia, you have magnetism. When you have magnetism, you have space. When you have space, you have mass and magnitude. When you have mass and magnitude, you have time. And when you have all of these things, you have the consubstantiality between spirit and matter, which of course is being, ontos. Yes? The resultant primordial ignorance, of course, being suffering. This is as simple as it gets, and it is divinely simple, and it is 100% undeniable. This is the primer of the entire universe from one corner to the next. If I am incorrect, may I be struck dead right now whence I sit. There are many ways to say something, and of course nothing is known except through the modality of the knower. Someone might express the same thing a different way, but this is the way the universe works. So, where does magnetism come from? I hope I've explained that fully. Let me know if I have not. If you're interested, contact me by description. Information below vis-a-vis email and other things that you can find in the description. Because everybody keeps asking me, how do I contact you? So my emails in every video. I hope you have a lovely week. By the way, I was without power yesterday. And yesterday was the hottest day of the year. It was 99 degrees. I was without power for hours. Oh my God, it was hot. Thankfully, I have Acmo power supplies. And so I fired up my computer and I fired up my fan. And I sat there with my skivvies on the computer with a fan blowing hot air on me. It is better than nothing. Oh man, I love those power supplies. I really needed them yesterday. Thank you so much for watching and have a great week. Goodbye.